Thank you very much to the Green Party for inviting me along to this event. You know that the NUT is not one of the unions that is affiliated to the Labour Party. We have relations with all the political parties, but we're particularly proud of our relationship with you in the Green Party. We have thousands of NUT members who are supporters or voters for the Green Party. As Tom just said, in the run-up to the general election, we had education question times across the country. Everyone that I went to, there was a Green Party member on the platform. And we, in the run-up to the election, were promoting our manifesto, our Standard for Education manifesto. And the Green Party manifesto, by a considerable margin, was closest to our thinking on all these education questions. So for us, it's important to carry on developing this relationship with you. I want to talk about three of the major campaigns that I think are important for the young people in this country at the moment. There's one around academisation and what we think of that, and I'd like to explore that with you. There's something about the stress and the testing culture that exists in our schools, and then something about a huge crisis of funding that is going to hit schools and sixth form colleges across the next period. I think there are things that we could talk about in the London mayoral election, where I think that, again, the Green Party and the NUT could have similar positions. There's a crisis about teacher supply, and the question of housing is going to come up massively in that. But on those three other things that I want to briefly touch on, I think it's important just to go back a step with this audience and say, we have to think about what education is for sometimes. Because mainstream politicians of Labour and Conservative parties, if you listen to them, you think education is about test results. They say that when education is improving, test results are going up. If we get more GCSEs, that's all the education is. And that cannot be enough for a view of why we bother to educate people. It is a part of it, but it can't be all of it. And sometimes it goes worse than that. You hear the current crop of ministers talk about preschool education as being to get children school ready, which is absurd. Schools should be children ready. You don't cram a child. They say that primary education is about making children secondary ready. That's not the purpose of primary education. A child in primary school should be enjoying being in school. The art that they do in school, the self-confidence they get from being in a school performance, all those things really matter, and they are being lost in this thought that the English and maths and being secondary ready is all that matters. And so it's important, I think, for all of us to have a fuller discussion about what education is for. The UN sometimes talks about this as the fullest development of the human personality, and that must be something that education is about. That's not hippy-drippy saying it's not about getting a good job, but it is saying it's about being happy in your life. It's about saying that you, as well as being an economic actor, you will have an arts life. You will have a passion for science that isn't in your job. You will have the need to cooperate with people around you. So we have to have a wider view of what education is for than I think that the mainstream politicians currently have. And it's also must be the case that education isn't just about the individual child. Now, sometimes the other side, the right of politics, have a view about this, and we talk about it, that they want to educate children to be compliant. They've got a wider view than just the individual child. Now, their view of the wider is wrong, but we are trying to bring up the next generation. We're trying to bring up a generation of people who will live in our modern, multicultural, tolerant society. And so the idea that education is about more than the individual child, I think, really matters as well. And again, don't get that when you're just talking about exam results. And I think it's important, therefore, there's a fight to have about that. Nevertheless, exam results matter, and I think it's important to say two things about that and about our society. One is that education has fantastically worked. The gains of people like ourselves who have fought for education, who fought for the wider movement, fought for secondary education to become free. It fought for girls' education to be on a par with boys' education. It fought for the rights of black and ethnic minority children in our education system. The comprehensive movement that took away the idea of failure at age 11 has been massively successful. Vastly more children get good exam results now than ever did during the days of the grammar schools. And yet, and I think that's an important thing to say, but another big important thing to say is there is an unacceptable variation in the results that children get in our society. Disadvantaged children get much worse exam results than the top performing children. And the Tories say that, and they use it in order to attack teachers and attack schools, but actually the statistical argument is just so clear. The more equal a society is, the more equal its exam results are. So if you look at Finland, the best education system in Europe, the best education system in the world, it's got the most equal exam results and the highest exam results. You look at America, one of the most unequal societies in the OECD, then they've got the widest variation of results, and that's why our results are so spread out at the moment. So it's vital, I think, for the NUT for another reason to engage with people like yourselves. People that want a more equal society, that leads to a better education system. I think that the mainstream politicians do far too much poverty blaming around these questions. They try and blame schools for the poor results that children in some very disadvantaged areas get. I'm from South Wales. My dad was the first person in our family not to work down the coal mine. He was a car mechanic. My mother was a school cleaner. So I'm from that sort of background. When I was a child, the working class in South Wales was honest as everybody thought of the working class in those days as being chapel-going, church members, Labour Party voting, trades union members, but a real sense of working class respectability. If you go to Merthyr Tydfil now, where they've closed the pits, they've closed the Hoover factory, and there is massive ongoing unemployment, then on some of the working class, some of the estates there, despite the fact that these are the next generation of those people, there is drugs and there is prostitution, and the exam results are not as good as they would be in a different society. So to get the best results from our schools, we also, teachers, have to be part of fighting for a more equal society, I believe. So, on these three things that I wanted to address, the question of academies, there is a bill going through the House of Commons and the House of Lords at the moment. We are talking well with Caroline about this. Caroline's putting amendments down for us alongside some in the Labour Party and some in the Lib Dems. This is an attempt by the government, and you heard it in David Cameron's speech to the Conservatives just 3 days ago. He wants to academise every school in the country, to remove local authorities from the piece on the question of education provision. And I think it's important just to think some of that through. First of all, on the question of what evidence they have, because this is a huge step that they're taking, much further than any other advanced nation has gone in terms of atomising school production, to giving it closer to private actors, further away from public accountable actors, much further than any other country has gone, further than Sweden with its free schools, further than the US with its charter schools. We are much further down the road. You would expect that with something that was so far, so extreme compared with other countries, that there would be a very strong evidence base for taking such a radical set of steps. And yet the evidence just isn't there to justify this academisation. So the Education Select Committee in January of this year, they published a study that they've been conducting for some time into academies. The Tory chair of that committee, Graham Stewart, who's the MP for Beverley, he signed a press release which said current evidence does not prove that academies raise standards overall or for disadvantaged children. We've had academies since 2002, so in January 2015, current evidence doesn't prove that they are improving standards either for children's standards overall or for disadvantaged children. That is an astonishing thing if we're going to academise every single school in the country not to have an evidence base for it. You would think that if you're that far in, 14 years in, you might think the evidence isn't going to appear if you haven't found it yet. They even gave up looking for weapons of mass destruction before they were 14 years out in Iraq, when they couldn't find them. This group also said, we have sought but not found convincing evidence of the impact of academy status on achievement in primary schools. And that really matters, because the next big round of academisation is of primary schools. 64% of secondary schools are already academies, but so far only 14% of primary schools. And that's the next big wave, but they have sought and not found any convincing evidence of the impact of standards in primary schools. So this really, I want to say to you that this really matters, how we organise education. And I want to say to you that academisation is a step on the road to privatisation of our education system. So far, not about profit. Profits not allowed. And yet, if you look at the chief executive of Harris, one of the very big academy school chains, run by Lord Harris, multi-millionaire Tory donor, the chief executive of that body paid more than the Secretary of State for Education, so not allowed to take a profit, but doing very, very nicely at providing education in this way. And many of these academy chains not making a profit in this country, but using their prestige as academy providers here to get involved in the privatisation directly of education in the global south. Our DFID, the Department for International Development, working with private actors in this country to directly privatise education in Kenya, in Nigeria, to set up private alternatives to the school systems there, damaging the school systems there. And I think we also have to have some argument about why it would be wrong to have, why privatisation doesn't work in education. Some people think it's worked in other areas, but I think there are a specific set of arguments about what's going on here that show why it doesn't work. And one way I like to talk about it is, if a shop closes, if Woolworths closes, then the people who work there have their lives disrupted in a major way. They've lost their employment, they have to find other employment. That's bad. If a school closes, then the children in that school, when it closes, their education can be almost terminally affected. So the Durham Free School, closed by the government because it was failing and they had no local roots to support it, those children being in that school 1 year or 2 years, settled in with a friendship group, then scattered to other schools across Durham, scattered and made to new friendship groups they have to find, losing all sense of themselves and taking the failure of their school with them. That is a terrible thing to happen to a child. So when you close a school in that circumstance, it's very damaging. And the other argument I want to make is that it is possible, there are two ways to improve a school. There's the hard way of improving teaching and learning, and there's the easy way of changing the pupil population. And we see that happening in far too many academy schools. So you look at the Outward Grange Academy School in Sheffield. Last year they expelled 210 children from one secondary school. They expelled 210 children, permanently left from that school. That isn't selection pre-entry, it's selection post-entry. Those children then end up in the other, if they aren't on the streets, they end up in the other school. So if they weren't doing well, then their not doing wellness is just exported to another school nearby. That school looks like it's doing well. Their exam results will no doubt go up in that circumstance. But when you look at the system as a whole, you are just making one school do well at the cost to the children that have been expelled and making the other schools nearby do badly. And that's the problem. If you don't have a public view that we want to improve the system, if you have a private view that you just want to improve your school or your chain, then that's what goes wrong. And that is what academisation is all about. Less private, less parent governors, less staff governors, no local authority councillors, no local authority appointed governors on the governing body. Instead, Lord Harris or Arpad Buson, another multi-millionaire, a hedge fund, another major Tory donor who runs the ARC chain of academies. These people getting into our education system and working from the inside to encourage more and more behaviour in that way. So I know the Green Party is opposed to this happening, and I want to urge you to continue with that fight alongside us and look for, in the non-tribal way, for as many allies as we can on it. And I'm going to stop with
I would like to say something about the